The raw, indifferent power of the vast North American wilderness often shapes a man into something as unyielding as the ancient rock formations that punctuate its sprawling, silent expanses. Yet beneath that hardened exterior, an unexpected vulnerability, a quiet humanity, can sometimes stir, defying the very laws of survival that govern such a harsh domain. Elias Thorne, a man whose visage bore the indelible marks of his chosen environment, lived a life stripped bare of superfluities. His face, a mosaic of deep lines etched by relentless sun, biting wind, and the sharp bite of frost, mirrored the craggy landscape he called home. His eyes, a piercing shade of blue-gray, were set deep, constantly sweeping the horizon, missing nothing, absorbing everything. A thick, untamed mane of graying hair, often windswept and tangled, framed a similarly salt and pepper beard, giving him the appearance of an ancient sentinel, a guardian of the silent forests. His hands, gnarled and powerful, were a testament to decades spent with axe and saw, setting trap lines and hauling heavy loads. They were hands that understood the texture of raw wood, the cold bite of steel, the slickness of frozen rope. His cabin, a sturdy, unassuming structure of hand-hewn logs, sat deep within the wilderness, a remote sanctuary, accessible only to those who knew its secrets or possessed the sheer will to find it. His days unfolded with the predictable rhythm of nature itself. The crack of an axe splitting timber for the stove, the methodical checking of trap lines stretched across miles of snow-laden terrain, the quiet mending of worn gear. He sought no company, finding a profound, almost spiritual, solace in the biting whispers of the wind through the towering pines and the boundless snow-covered expanse that stretched to the distant, jagged peaks. It was an existence defined by its rigors, an unforgiving path that demanded constant vigilance and an unwavering spirit. But it was his path, one he navigated with a practiced, almost instinctual resilience that had been forged in countless solitary winters and long, demanding summers. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle in the undergrowth, every shift in the wind's direction was a note in a symphony only he could truly hear and understand. He was a part of this wild tapestry, woven into its threads of life and death, predator and prey. His solitude was not born of misanthropy, but of a deep, abiding respect for the wilderness that required a singular focus, a devotion that left little room for the complexities of human connection. He had, perhaps, always been a man apart, even before the wilderness fully claimed him, even before the quiet chasm opened between him and his daughter Lily, who had chosen a world far removed from the silent majesty of the pines. That unspoken distance was a shadow that sometimes lengthened in the quietest hours, a ghost that lingered in the periphery of his self-imposed isolation. One brutal winter morning, the air so sharp it stung the lungs with every breath, Elias was out on his routine, checking his trap lines along the serpentine bends of the frozen North Fork River. The ice, a treacherous, gray-white expanse, groaned softly beneath his heavy boots, a constant, low murmur that spoke of hidden currents and unpredictable fragility. The landscape was a stark, monochrome painting, every branch coated in rime, every distant ridge softened by a fresh dusting of snow that fell ceaselessly, a fine, biting powder. It was then, amidst the swirling flakes and the endless white, that a sight emerged from the muted canvas, bringing him to an abrupt halt. Embedded deep within a treacherous sheet of river ice, barely discernible beneath a light, fresh layer of snow, was a large gray wolf. Its powerful body was half submerged, locked in the frigid grip, its fur a matted, icy crust. The creature was half dead, its movements ceased, its head slumped low. Yet, as Elias cautiously approached, the wolf's eyes, though filmed over with the glazed dullness of hypothermia, held a spark, a faint, desperate flicker of defiance, a silent, primal plea for something more than mere survival. A thin, ethereal mist, the last vestiges of its breath, ghosted faintly in the sub-zero air, a testament to its fading life. Elias, a man whose life was inextricably linked to the harsh realities of predator and prey, who understood the brutal calculus of the wild, felt an unexpected pang of something akin to empathy, a feeling he rarely indulged, even less expected to direct towards a creature he would typically view as a competitor or quarry. It was a fleeting, unsettling sensation, a quiet disruption in the carefully constructed order of his solitary world. The wild often demanded indifference, but this was different. This was a life clinging to the very edge, a magnificent animal trapped not by his snares, but by the indiscriminate cruelty of nature itself. The decision, when it came, was not born of logic or calculation, but of an instinct, a deep-seated primal urge that surprised even Elias himself. It was a sudden, unwavering resolve, born in that single moment of connection with the wolf's desperate gaze. He moved, battling not only the unforgiving cold that clawed at his exposed skin and sought to numb his fingers, but also the treacherous, shifting ice beneath his feet, which threatened to betray him with every careful step. He also had to contend with the wolf's own instinctive fear, a low growl rumbling deep in its chest despite its weakened state, a desperate warning to the encroaching human. With an axe, its steel head glinting dully in the pale winter light, and a coil of stout rope slung over his shoulder, Elias began the perilous rescue. He painstakingly chipped away at the unyielding ice, each strike a jarring vibration up his arms, each shard of frozen water flying into the frigid air. He worked with a fierce concentration, the risk of plunging into the freezing, dark water himself a constant, chilling companion. It was a brutal, hours-long ordeal, a test of his formidable strength, and an unexpected act of compassion in a world where such sentiments often seem to freeze solid, as rigid and unyielding as the ice itself. His muscles screamed with the effort. His breath came in ragged gasps, but he did not stop, driven by that inexplicable, silent covenant forged in the heart of the wild. Man is whole only when he is in tune with the music of the spheres and in harmony with nature itself. His solitude was not a void, but a rich, intricate tapestry woven from the silence, the wind's ancient tales, and the ceaseless, quiet drama of life and death playing out around him. Elias had not always been this way. Once, the echoes of a different life, one filled with the clamor of a town and the warmth of a young family, had reverberated within him. But the wilderness, with its stark honesty and its demand for unwavering self-reliance, had called to him with an undeniable urgency after a series of personal losses that had left him feeling adrift in the human world. He had sought not to escape, but to find a truth, a fundamental rhythm that the city had long since forgotten. Here, every decision was vital, every sunrise a small victory, every sunset a promise of the next challenge. His cabin, a fortress against the elements, was also a sanctuary for his soul, a place where the cacophony of regret and expectation faded into the whisper of the pines. He had honed his senses to an almost preternatural degree. He could tell the time by the slant of the sun through the branches, predict a coming storm by the scent of the air, and discern the passage of creatures by the faintest disturbance in the snow. This profound attunement was his strength, his shield, and his unspoken language with the wild. The wolf, a magnificent male, lay half submerged, its once lustrous gray coat now a frozen, matted mess, indistinguishable from the surrounding ice in places. Its breath, when it came, was a shallow, ragged puff, each one a desperate struggle against the encroaching cold that was systematically shutting down its powerful body. Elias knelt, his breath pluming in the frigid air, observing the subtle tremors that ran through the wolf's frame. He noted the way its eyelids fluttered, revealing the last vestiges of a fierce spirit, a will to live that refused to surrender even to the icy embrace of death. This was no ordinary animal, he mused, no mere quarry for his traps. This was a creature of legend, a symbol of the untamed wilderness he revered, brought low by a stroke of cruel fortune. The sheer scale of its predicament, The profound helplessness of such a powerful beast stirred something deep within him, a recognition of shared vulnerability in the face of nature's overwhelming might. It was an anomaly, a breach in the natural order of things, to see such a predator so utterly at the mercy of the elements, and it struck a chord within Elias that he hadn't known existed. The wolf's eyes, fixed on his, seemed to plead not for mercy, but for a chance, a defiance against the inevitable. It was a silent challenge, an appeal to the very essence of survival that defined Elias's own existence. The rescue was a brutal ballet of man against ice, a test of will and endurance that stretched Elias to his limits. He worked methodically, each swing of the axe precise, aimed at the weakest points of the ice around the wolf's trapped limbs. The sound of splintering ice echoed eerily in the vast silence, a sharp counterpoint to the wind's mournful howl. He had to be careful. One misstep, one crack too far, and he would join the wolf in the freezing depths. The wolf's eyes, fixed on his, seemed to plead, not for mercy, but for a chance, a defiance against the inevitable. It was a silent challenge, an appeal to the very essence of survival that defined Elias's own existence. The rescue was a brutal ballet of man against ice, a test of will and endurance that stretched Elias to his limits. He worked methodically, each swing of the axe precise, aimed at the weakest points of the ice around the wolf's trapped limbs. The sound of splintering ice echoed eerily in the vast silence, a sharp counterpoint to the wind's mournful howl. He had to be careful. One misstep, one crack too far, and he would join the wolf in the freezing depths. He remembered the feel of the rope, rough against his gloved hands, as he painstakingly worked it beneath the wolf's chest, using a long, sturdy branch to guide it. The wolf, despite its weakness, instinctively snapped and growled, a guttural warning that spoke of fear and pain. Elias spoke to it in low, soothing tones, words he rarely used, words meant for a struggling animal, not a human companion. "Easy, boy, easy now. I'm not here to hurt you." He worked for what felt like an eternity, his breath fogging, his muscles aching with a deep, burning fatigue. The sun, a pale disk in the winter sky, began its slow descent, threatening to plunge the landscape into an even colder, more dangerous darkness. Finally, with a monumental heave, using the axe handle as a lever against a solid section of ice, he managed to free the last of the wolf's frozen limbs. The creature, a dead weight, was then slowly, agonizingly dragged from its icy prison, leaving a dark, gaping hole in the river's surface. Elias collapsed for a moment on the bank, chest heaving, the cold biting through his layers, but a strange, quiet triumph settled in his heart. He had defied the wilderness, not by conquering it, but by extending a hand of unlikely mercy. Hauling the semi-conscious wolf back to his cabin was another Herculean task, a desperate race against the deepening cold and the wolf's fading life. He fashioned a makeshift sled from a sturdy piece of timber and his strongest tarp, carefully maneuvering the heavy, limp form over the snow. The journey was slow, arduous, each step a struggle through the deepening drifts. Back in the cabin, the warmth of the roaring fire seemed to awaken a flicker of awareness in the wolf. Elias, a man of practical skills, not medical training, drew upon his vast knowledge of the wild and his limited supplies. He cleaned the deep gashes on its legs and flanks, wounds sustained not from the ice, but likely from a previous, desperate struggle for survival. He carefully applied a poultice of wild herbs he kept for his own ailments, their pungent scent filling the small cabin. He melted snow for water, gently forcing small sips between the wolf's lips, and offered slivers of dried venison, the last of his winter stores. The wolf, which he now called Ghost, for its spectral appearance and silent movements, was a study in resilience. Slowly, agonizingly, the creature began to stir, its breathing deepening, its eyes losing their vacant stare, replaced by a wary, intelligent glint. The cabin, usually a bastion of human solitude, was now shared space,
a fragile truce between predator and man, built on the desperate need for survival and an unexpected act of grace. Days turned into weeks, a quiet vigil. Elias would often sit by the fire, watching Ghost, observing the subtle shifts in its demeanor. The wolf, in turn, watched him, its amber eyes tracking his every move, a silent assessment, a tentative bridge forming between their two disparate worlds. There was no growling now, no snapping, just a profound, watchful silence. The morning Ghost slipped away was marked by a fresh layer of snow, pristine and undisturbed. Elias awoke to an unfamiliar quiet, a void where the wolf's heavy breathing had been. He found the cabin ajar, the snow outside bearing only the faint, deliberate paw prints leading away into the vast, silent world. There was no surprise, no anger, only a quiet understanding that settled deep within his bones. Ghost was a creature of the wild, and the cabin, no matter how warm or safe, could never truly contain its spirit. It was a temporary refuge, a debt acknowledged, but not a prison. Elias felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. Not sadness, but a profound sense of completion, perhaps. Yet, Ghost was not entirely gone. Weeks later, Elias would catch a fleeting glimpse of a gray shadow at the edge of the tree line, a pair of intelligent, amber eyes watching him from a distance before melting back into the forest. Sometimes, he'd find a freshly killed rabbit or grouse left near his trapline, a silent offering, a gesture he understood implicitly. The silent pact, born of ice and kindness, had not been broken. It had merely evolved, shifting from a physical presence to a lingering, watchful spirit, a guardian unseen yet undeniably there. It was a new chapter in his relationship with the wilderness, a covenant of mutual respect and unspoken understanding. The first repayment of the unspoken debt was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone but Elias, a man intimately attuned to the nuances of his environment. A particularly fierce blizzard, one of the worst in years, had descended without warning, trapping Elias in his cabin for days. The snow piled high against the windows, the wind howled like a banshee, and the temperature plummeted to dangerous lows. His firewood, usually meticulously managed, was dwindling faster than expected due to the unseasonable cold. Venturing out was perilous, the visibility almost zero, the risk of getting lost immense. Just as despair, a rare emotion for Elias, began to set in, a lone wolf howl echoed nearby, closer than usual, cutting through the din of the storm. It was Ghost, he knew, with an uncertainty that defied logic. Following the sound, a beacon in the whiteout, Elias stumbled through the drifts, his face stinging with ice. He found not just Ghost, a silent, watchful presence at the edge of a small, sheltered ravine, but a hidden cache of fallen timber, perfectly sheltered beneath an overhang, untouched by the snow and ready for collection. It was enough to last him through the worst of the storm, a gift from the wild. Later, another instance. A wolverine, a notorious scavenger and destroyer of traplines, had been plaguing his most lucrative snare, stealing his catches and ruining his traps. Elias, frustrated and losing valuable pelts, had almost given up on that section. One morning, he found the wolverine's tracks, unusually fresh, leading away from his snare, clearly driven off. Intersecting them, leading directly back to the larger, unmistakable paw prints of a wolf. The wild was returning the favor, in its own mysterious way, a silent protection extending beyond the immediate act of rescue, weaving itself into the fabric of his daily survival. Elias's carefully constructed solitude was shattered not by the raw power of nature, but by the distant, unexpected ring of his satellite phone, a device he rarely used, kept only for emergencies. It was Lily, his estranged daughter, calling from the bustling, rain-swept city of Seattle. Years had passed since their last meaningful conversation, a chasm of unspoken words and differing life choices separating them. He remembered her as a vibrant, headstrong young woman, eager to leave the quiet confines of his world for the bright lights and endless possibilities of urban life. He had watched her go, a knot of pride and pain in his chest, understanding her ambition even as it pulled her away. Now, her voice, though strained by the crackle of the satellite connection, held a sudden, heartfelt desire to visit him, to understand the life he chose, to bridge the years of silence that had stretched between them like an impassable canyon. She spoke of a need to reconnect, to find some semblance of family, to perhaps mend the fractured relationship that had been a quiet ache in Elias's hardened heart for far too long. Elias, though wary of the disruption her presence would bring to his ordered world and uncertain of his own capacity for such emotional engagement, agreed.
A flicker of hope, fragile yet persistent, stirred in his chest, a yearning for reconciliation he hadn't realized he still possessed. He found himself cleaning the cabin with an uncharacteristic zeal, preparing for an arrival that would challenge every aspect of his solitary existence. Lily arrived a week later, a whirlwind of vibrant city energy and utterly unprepared for the raw, untamed power of the wilderness. She stepped out of the small bush plane, a splash of bright colors against the muted winter landscape, carrying sleek, high-tech luggage that looked comically out of place. Her initial enthusiasm, a bright, almost childlike wonder at the pristine beauty, soon gave way to discomfort as the biting cold seeped into her fashionable but inadequate layers. The silence, so comforting to Elias, was unsettling to her, a vast, oppressive void. She tried, with an earnestness that touched Elias, to engage with his world, asking questions about his traps, his routines, the names of the trees. But her city-honed senses were overwhelmed. The smells were too earthy, the sounds too sparse, the comforts too few. Just as she began to acclimate, or at least to tolerate, her new surroundings, a brutal, unseasonable blizzard descended upon them with a ferocity that even Elias found alarming. It was a white wall, a tempest that swallowed the landscape whole, trapping them in the cabin and cutting off all communication with the outside world. The satellite phone, their only link, went dead, a silent harbinger of isolation. During a momentary, deceptive lull in the storm's fury, a brief clearing that offered a tantalizing glimpse of blue sky, Lily, seeking to prove her resilience, her ability to conquer this wild, ventured out for a short walk. She wanted to gather some fresh snow for melting, a small act of self-sufficiency. But the lull was fleeting, a cruel trick of the weather. The storm raged anew, a sudden, blinding onslaught of wind and snow, swallowing her in its white fury, erasing her tracks within moments. Elias, injured during a desperate, last-minute attempt to secure the cabin's loose shutters against the storm's escalating violence, felt a cold dread grip him. A heavy piece of timber, ripped free by a particularly vicious gust, had struck his arm, leaving a deep gash and a searing pain that radiated through his shoulder. Despite the throbbing injury, despite the blizzard's blinding intensity, he knew he had to go. Lily was out there, lost. He strapped on his snowshoes, grabbed his emergency kit, and plunged into the maelstrom. His strength, usually boundless, waned with every arduous step. Each movement a battle against the swirling snow and the relentless, biting cold that threatened to steal his breath and numb his resolve. The vast, indifferent wilderness, which had always been his sanctuary, now seemed determined to claim his daughter, a cruel twist of fate after he had just begun to hope for reconciliation. He called her name, his voice hoarse, swallowed by the wind. He searched for tracks, for any sign, but the snow fell so thick and fast that obliterated all evidence of her passage. Despair, cold and sharp, began to set in, threatening to paralyze him. Just as his legs faltered, just as his vision blurred from the effort and the freezing air, a familiar gray shadow emerged from the blizzard, a silent, spectral presence. Ghost. The wolf stood before him, its fur frosted with ice, its intelligent amber eyes fixed intently on Elias, a silent command in its gaze, an unmistakable urgency that cut through the storm's chaos. Ghost moved with a quiet urgency, a beacon of primal instinct leading Elias through the blinding, disorienting storm. The wolf kept a steady pace, always just ahead, its powerful body cutting a path through the deep drifts, its head occasionally turning to ensure Elias was following. Elias, relying solely on Ghost's unerring sense of direction, stumbled forward, his injured arm screaming with pain, his lungs burning with the frigid air. The world was a swirling vortex of white, but Ghost was his anchor, his guide. They moved for what felt like an eternity, the blizzard's roar a constant, deafening presence. Then Ghost stopped abruptly, its nose low to the ground, a soft whine escaping its throat. Elias pushed through the last few feet of snow and found her, Lily. Unconscious but alive, buried beneath a snowdrift, her face pale, lips tinged blue, but a faint pulse fluttering at her neck. Relief, profound and overwhelming, washed over Elias, threatening to bring him to his knees. He scooped her up, cradling her cold body, a silent prayer of thanks escaping his lips. But his relief was short-lived. As Ghost turned to lead them back, its path had also revealed something else, something chillingly out of place in the pristine wilderness. Fresh, human tracks, distinct and numerous, not from any rescue teams, but from a group of local hunters. The tracks led towards a hidden, rocky outcrop, a place Elias knew well, a place he now realized must be Ghost's den. The unspoken debt, Elias understood with a chilling, sickening clarity, was not merely for saving Lily. It was a profound, terrifying bargain, protection for protection. He had saved Ghost's life, and in return, Ghost had saved his daughter's. Now, the ledger demanded its final, most perilous entry. He must shield Ghost and its hidden family from this new human danger, a threat far more insidious than any blizzard. With Lily safely back in the cabin, slowly recovering from the hypothermia, wrapped in furs by the roaring fire, Elias faced his impossible choice. The hunters were out there, their presence a stark, brutal intrusion into the delicate balance he had unwittingly become a part of. He couldn't simply alert authorities without also exposing Ghost, putting the wolf and its vulnerable pups at grave risk. The wilderness, in its wisdom, had returned his kindness with a profound gift, and now it asked for a similar act of faith and courage. He had to confront them himself, to divert them, to protect the delicate, ancient covenant he had forged. His injured arm throbbed, a constant reminder of his own fragility, but his resolve hardened. Using his intimate knowledge of the land, his cunning, and the ancient wisdom of the wild, Elias navigated the dangerous terrain. He moved like a phantom, a shadow among shadows, carefully erasing his own tracks, creating false trails with discarded fur scraps and carefully placed scent markers, leading the hunters away from Ghost's den. He knew their methods, their habits, their greed. He understood their language of pursuit. He would circle back, create diversions, perhaps even set off a small, controlled avalanche in a remote area to scare them off, anything to ensure the survival of Ghost's den. It was a dangerous game, risking his own precarious standing with the law if caught interfering with legal hunting, or worse, facing the hunter's wrath as they discovered his deception. But the choice was clear. The life he had saved, the life that had saved his daughter, now demanded his absolute loyalty. He was no longer just Elias Thorne, solitary trapper. He was a guardian, a silent warrior for the wild, bound by a debt far deeper than any human contract. Lily, slowly returning to full awareness, watched her father with new eyes. She saw not just the stoic, distant man she had left behind years ago, but a figure of immense strength, courage, and an extraordinary, almost mystical connection to the wild. She witnessed the quiet, intense way he moved, the unspoken understanding he shared with the gray wolf that occasionally appeared at the edge of the tree line, its eyes meeting her father's in a silent exchange. She saw his self-sacrificing actions, the way he risked everything to protect a creature that had once been a symbol of fear, now a symbol of profound loyalty. The blizzard had stripped away her city-bred assumptions, revealing the raw, beautiful truth of her father's character and the profound spirit of the wilderness that animated him. Elias, in turn, felt a quiet easing of the years of tension between them.
Lily no longer looked at him with judgment or confusion, but with a deep, newfound respect and understanding. He lived with the quiet knowledge of the debt paid, not in currency or favors, but in a deeper, more primal covenant etched into the very soul of the land. The experience forged an unbreakable bond between father and daughter, a connection rooted in shared adversity and a mutual awe for the untamed world. And between man and the wild, the covenant endured, a silent agreement that transcended human understanding, echoing through the ancient, silent forests he called home, a testament to the enduring power of empathy and the profound, often terrifying balance that exists when humanity dares to step into the wild's ledger. Lily, instead of rushing back to the city, chose to stay, to learn, to observe, to understand the rhythms of a life she once dismissed. She began to see the world through her father's eyes, finding a beauty and a truth in the harshness that had once repelled her. The cabin, once a place of solitude, now held the promise of a renewed family, a quiet reconciliation forged in the crucible of ice and a wolf's unwavering loyalty. Elias, for the first time in many years, felt a sense of peace that extended beyond the mere absence of conflict, a quiet warmth that thawed the edges of his hardened heart. The wild had asked for a debt, and in its repayment, had given him back something he thought was lost forever.
The raw, indifferent power of the vast North American wilderness often shapes a man into something as unyielding as the ancient rock formations that punctuate its sprawling, silent expanses. Yet beneath that hardened exterior, an unexpected vulnerability, a quiet humanity can sometimes stir, defying the very laws of survival that govern such a harsh domain. Elias Thorne, a man whose visage bore the indelible marks of his chosen environment, lived a life stripped bare of superfluities. His face, a mosaic of deep lines etched by relentless sun, biting wind, and the sharp bite of frost, mirrored the craggy landscape he called home. His eyes, a piercing shade of blue-gray, were set deep, constantly sweeping the horizon, missing nothing, absorbing everything. A thick, untamed mane of graying hair, often windswept and tangled, framed a similarly salt and pepper beard, giving him the appearance of an ancient sentinel, a guardian of the silent forests. His hands, gnarled and powerful, were a testament to decades spent with axe and saw, setting trap lines and hauling heavy loads. They were hands that understood the texture of raw wood, the cold bite of steel, the slickness of frozen rope. His cabin, a sturdy, unassuming structure of hand-hewn logs, sat deep within the wilderness, a remote sanctuary accessible only to those who knew its secrets or possessed the sheer will to find it. His days unfolded with the predictable rhythm of nature itself. The crack of an axe splitting timber for the stove, the methodical checking of trap lines stretched across miles of snow-laden terrain, the quiet mending of worn gear. He sought no company, finding a profound, almost spiritual solace in the biting whispers of the wind through the towering pines and the boundless snow-covered expanse that stretched to the distant, jagged peaks.